Hi, I'm Tessa with Brain Rot News, here to force feed you another helping of authoritarian power grabs and shredded constitutional norms, served lukewarm and unseasoned, just the way the Heritage Foundation likes it. On today's menu, the Bill of Rights is getting waterboarded in the basement of the White House.
Brain Rot the News.
Part 1. The Bill of Rights Going Away Party. It's January 20th, 2025. Trump is sworn in again, indoors this time, because God himself seems to be protesting, and within minutes, the Constitution starts taking fire like it's back in Fallujah. Right out of the gate, Trump drops a blitz of executive orders so audacious they make his first term look like a warm-up set. We're talking expanded surveillance, ICE raids like it's Black Friday at a police surplus store, voting restrictions with the subtlety of a brick through a ballot box, and a new press strategy. Sue them all and let Rupert Murdoch sort it all out. ICE is back on its bullshit, but now with more bonus constitutional violations. Trump's team has cracked open the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, a law written before we started washing our hands after using the bathroom. It's the perfect tool for removing threats, which apparently includes asylum seekers, permanent residents, and anyone who ever tweeted Free Palestine. Due process is no longer on the menu. Detainees are being deported before they even know they've been accused of something. Students are learning they would be deported when their Google Calendar updates with flight to CCOT. Lawyers call it unconstitutional, Trump calls it efficient. The Department of Justice has officially gone on strike. It dropped civil rights lawsuits like hot potatoes in Pennsylvania and Georgia, where discrimination has apparently been rebranded as states' rights. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court, now a subdivision of the Federalist Society, greenlit a voter purge in Virginia based on suspected non-citizenship, which in this context seems to mean voted while brown. Trump's DOJ is now floating ideas like tying federal money to voter ID laws and proof of citizenship mandates, effectively saying, you want rights? Show us your birth certificate. All of this, of course, is wrapped in the well-worn cloak of election integrity, which is Republican for, we're losing, make it illegal to vote. If you thought calling the press the enemy of the people was bad, wait until you hear about Operation Sue the Shit Out of Journalists. Trump has openly floated defamation lawsuits as a form of media control, and insiders are whispering about press credentials being revoked based on ideological non-alignment, a term that definitely doesn't sound fascist at all. Legal scholars and press watchdogs are sounding every alarm, while Trump World treats the First Amendment like a Mad Libs page. Fill in your favorite billionaire, remove any mention of criticism. A presidency that was already allergic to checks and balances has decided to go full tilt into a banana republic. Power is centralizing, courts are being packed, surveillance is ramping up, and the law is just an inconvenient suggestion. But hey, it's not all doom and gloom. The resistance hasn't folded just yet. Civil rights groups are flooding the courts with lawsuits. ACLU lawyers haven't slept in weeks, and public interest groups are filing amicus briefs like their lives depend on it, because they do. Even some congressional Democrats have emerged from their wine caves long enough to issue sternly worded letters and the occasional subcommittee hearing. The press, too, is still swinging, even as Trump threatens to sue NPR into a silent void. We are now watching a real-time demolition derby between authoritarian executive power and the increasingly exhausted scaffolding of American democracy. If you thought Trump 1.0 was dangerous, you ain't seen nothing yet. Strap in. This isn't just another bad sequel, it's the part where the villain wins unless someone breaks the glass. Part 2. Soft launch of authoritarianism. Trump's first term was a soft launch for authoritarianism, a constitutional stress test, and thankfully the Constitution held. In his first term, Donald Trump treated the Constitution less like a governing document and more like a napkin to scribble grudges on. The press became a personal enemy, immigrants a prop for cruelty, and surveillance powers a toy to play with when the cable news cycle got boring. What wasn't outright illegal was often unconstitutional, and what was constitutional was usually ignored. Take November 2018. After a tense exchange in the White House briefing room, Trump's team yanked CNN reporter Jim Acosta's press credentials like they were kicking out an unruly bar patron. A federal judge slapped their hands and ordered the press pass to be reinstated, reminding everyone, at least temporarily, that yeah, the First Amendment still applied to people who asked tough questions. But the broader message had already been sent. Criticize the president and you're expendable. That tone metastasized. PEN America sued the administration for targeting journalists with retaliatory bans, threats, and denial of access. press. They warned that using public office to punish reporting wasn't just petty, it was a constitutional crisis with a press pass. Even Trump's so-called free speech executive orders, wrapped in patriotic branding, aimed to not protect dissent, but to intimidate social media companies into becoming megaphones for state propaganda. Then, Trump reauthorized Section 702 of FISA, an expansive surveillance tool that lets federal agencies scoop up communications between Americans and foreign threats. Despite campaign pledges to rein in the NSA, Trump handed them the keys to the Fourth Amendment's back door, letting them conduct warrantless searches and call it national security. That foreign surveillance net just happened to catch millions of American emails and texts along the way. Oops. Then came the administration's most grotesque flex, family separation. In 2018, under the dystopian-sounding zero-tolerance policy, ICE agents tore children from their parents and scattered them across state lines without any tracking system. Infants and toddlers gone. The ACLU sued, the courts intervened, and yet hundreds, if not thousands, of children were never reunited because cruelty was the point. It was bureaucratized trauma disguised as immigration policy. Fast-track deportations bypassed hearings. People were expelled before they even saw a lawyer, and due process wasn't suspended, it was erased. While all that was happening, Trump rolled out a Muslim ban so blatantly discriminatory that federal courts initially blocked it. But after a couple of cosmetic edits, the Supreme Court gave it a thumbs up in 2018. So just like that, the government could legally discriminate as long as it came with a press release and some national security buzzwords. None of this was subtle. It was a stress test on the Constitution. And the truth is, we barely passed the test. Trump's first term didn't just reveal authoritarian instincts, it revealed how fragile our system really is. When the guardrails are treated as suggestions and consequences are delayed until it's too late. What's happening now in 2025 is not a surprise. It is the sequel we all should have expected. The script was written years ago, and the courts, Congress, and too many Americans let the curtain rise anyway. Part 3. How to sue your way to silence. Since January 20th, 2025, Trump's second term has escalated into a full-blown constitutional demolition derby, one where the First Amendment is the hood ornament and the dissenters are getting flattened. The last 90 days have been a grim speed run through the autocrat's favorite chapter of the playbook: crush protests, intimidate the press, and turn college campuses into ideological detention zones. On the streets, the crackdowns have been surgical and brutal. In 22 states, lawmakers have introduced over 40 anti-protest bills that read less like policy and more like Orwellian performance art. These laws carry felony penalties for blocking roads, fines for organizing protests deemed disruptive, and criminal liability for just showing up to the wrong rally. They weren't written to protect infrastructure, they were written to protect power. And if you're protesting pipelines, war crimes, or fascism in a bandana, then congratulations, you're probably a domestic threat. The goal is obvious: make the cost of protests so high that even holding a sign feels like playing Russian roulette with your civil rights. Back on campus, things have gotten downright dystopian. Executive Order 14188, sold to the public as an effort to fight anti-Semitism, has turned into a dragnet for punishing international students who dare to speak out, especially those waving a Palestinian flag or asking the wrong questions in class. Under the order, ICE is crawling campuses like it's hunting subversives in a McCarthy-era rerun, yanking visas and slapping deportation notices on students for alleged illegal protests. The message is crystal clear: criticize the state, lose your degree, your visa, and maybe even your future. Academic freedom is a buzzword for administration brochures. In 2025, free speech on campus has to pass a national security background check. It doesn't stop there. The White House has declared open war on the press with a level of vengeance that makes Nixon look like a community college civics teacher. In April, 60 Minutes executive producer Bill Owens resigned after Trump sued CBS for $20 billion over an interview with Kamala Harris. The segment apparently offended His Excellency. Owens was clear that he quit because, in his own view, he became the corporation's problem. Think about that. One of the most storied investigative news shows in American history was bent under the weight of a lawsuit designed not to win, but to exhaust, intimidate, and scare the next journalist into silence. Mission accomplished. And let's not forget about the $15 million settlement Trump wrung out of ABC News after George Stephanopoulos dared to speak out of turn about the E. Jean Carroll verdict. It wasn't just a payday, it was a message. Criticize me, and I will personally sue you into oblivion. oblivion. These aren't lawsuits, they are guided missiles disguised as subpoenas. They are strategic lawsuits against public participation, slap lawsuits with the explicit goal of smothering critical coverage, and they're working. Legal threats, layoffs, and executive interference have turned once proud newsrooms into legal triage units. Every press pass now comes with a disclaimer. Warning, use of this credential may result in financial obliteration. And if you think the administration is limiting its crusade to domestic outlets, think again. In March, Trump tried to gut the U.S. Agency for Global Media, home to Voice of America, Radio Free Asia, and others, because apparently America's international media presence wasn't sycophantic enough. Over 1,000 journalists were suspended overnight, and broadcasts that serve as lifelines in authoritarian states went dark with budget cuts as the justification. The reality is that their full intent was to silence journalists, foreign and domestic, who don't toe the party line. It took a federal judge stepping in to block the move, calling it arbitrary, capricious, and likely illegal. And still, the damage was done. The US effectively handed over its global megaphone to state-sponsored propaganda outlets in China and Russia, all to preserve the president's fragile ego. Then there's academia, or at least what's left of it. Harvard, a bastion of bourgeois liberalism, found itself under siege for refusing to roll over and correct how it handles campus protests. The administration froze $2.2 billion in research grants, demanding that the university revamp its governance, hiring policies, and curriculum to better align with conservative orthodoxy. In response, Harvard sued. They argued that the Trump administration is using federal funds as a political bludgeon to suppress campus speech and academic freedom. And they're right. This is what weaponized governance looks like. Refuse to purge your diversity office? Lose your cancer research budget. It's not policy, it's extortion in a suit. But Harvard wasn't alone. 60 other universities received Department of Education warning letters, initiating investigations and threatening funding cuts unless they cracked down on student protests. Ostensibly, these were about combating anti-Semitism. In practice, they were about chilling speech, demonizing dissent, and turning universities into ideological echo chambers. The administration is using federal education funds the way mob bosses use baseball bats to make sure everyone's on message, or else. For a more detailed breakdown, see our video about Trump's war on higher learning. In less than 100 days, the Trump administration has taken a wrecking ball to the First Amendment. Protests are being criminalized, journalists are being sued into silence, and students are being deported for holding unpopular opinions. This is not about law and order. It is about power and obedience. It's about turning democratic rights into privileges you can lose the moment you speak out. And if you think they will stop at protesters, students, and journalists, just wait. They're coming for the rest of us too. Part 4. Your privacy has left the building. By the time Trump's second term hit the 90-day mark, it was already clear. The surveillance state wasn't just back, it had been handed steroids, satellite imagery, AI-powered drones, and a get-out-of-oversight-free card signed by the president himself. In 2025, privacy is no longer an expectation. It is an inconvenience, and the Fourth Amendment is a quaint relic that is now being treated like a suggestion from a particularly naive intern at the NSA. It starts where it always does, with Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, a Cold War fossil repurposed as a limitless domestic dragnet. Despite bipartisan efforts in Congress to at least pretend there's a line between foreign surveillance and peeking into grandma's Gmail, the Trump administration has made it clear that it wants no reforms, no warrants, and no oversight. Senior officials have been deployed like loyal foot soldiers to stomp out any legislative rebellion, threatening vetoes for even the mildest suggestions that maybe, just maybe, Americans shouldn't be swept up in the intelligence community's fishing expeditions. A federal court recently ruled that querying U.S. persons without warrant may be unconstitutional, a ruling the White House responded to with the legal equivalent of a shrug and a thinly veiled yawn. They say it is the price of national security. You do not need privacy when you've got freedom, or rather, when the government has freedom from the Fourth Amendment, judicial review, and public scrutiny. But why stop at data scraping when you can watch people from space? In late March, the administration quietly instructed the intelligence agencies to begin using U.S. spy satellites to monitor border activity. We are now pointing billion-dollar orbital surveillance systems inward, not to track missiles, but migrants. Throw in a fleet of commercial drones, facial recognition, and a few proprietary AI models that mistake anything brown and breathing for a national security threat, and you've got yourself a digital wall. It's not metaphorical anymore. So who gets caught in the crosshairs of this racist perimeter? Everyone within a few miles of a border, plus a few million people who happen to live where proximity to civil unrest is now considered probable cause. This high-tech creep doesn't stop at the border either. Protests are now fertile ground for surveillance experiments that would make a Chinese technocrat blush. Cell tower data is being harvested like corn in Iowa. Geofence warrants, charming little judicial shortcuts that let cops collect information on every single phone in a protest zone, are now becoming routine. Want to peacefully demonstrate for climate action or Palestinian rights? Expect your phone's location to end up in a government spreadsheet, and expect the police to know your route home before you do. This isn't targeted surveillance, it's ideological profiling with a data plan. And if you're unlucky enough to be swept up in the dragnet, good luck proving your innocence in a system where your very presence in the crowd now makes you suspicious. If all this still sounds too subtle, don't worry. Trump also dusted off the Insurrection Act like it was a vintage MAGA hat. Inauguration Day 2025 came with a charming memorandum directing Defense and Homeland Security to assess whether military deployment within U.S. borders might be warranted. The administration openly flirted with using troops to bolster civilian law enforcement at the border, blurring the line between domestic policing and military occupation. The move set off alarms among civil liberties groups who pointed out correctly that using the U.S. military as a stand-in for police is a fast track to authoritarianism. The Posse Comitatus Act was supposed to prevent this exact nightmare scenario, but in Trump's America, legal tradition is just one more bureaucratic speed bump on the road to executive supremacy. And lest anyone think this was all a bureaucratic accident, the administration put its ambitions into writing. Executive Order 14161, signed on day one, gave DHS and the DoD sweeping authority to consolidate surveillance data across federal agencies, meaning that if you have ever interacted with a federal database like Medicaid, FAFSA, or even TSA PreCheck, you're now part of an integrated vetting machine. The language in the order insists it's all in the name of national security and public safety, but legal analysts warn this effectively creates a real-time surveillance architecture with no independent oversight. If fusion centers were already dystopian, this new system turns them into full-blown panopticons. But the piece de resistance came with Executive Order 14215, which brought supposedly independent agencies like the FCC and the FTC under direct White House supervision. In one stroke, the administration not only centralized regulatory authority, but positioned itself to gut privacy protections at will. Want to kill net neutrality again? Go ahead. Want to demand metadata retention from telecoms without court approval? Be our guest. With the executive branch now acting as judge, jury, and regulator-in-chief, there is no meaningful check on what data the government can collect or how it can be used. Put it all together, and what you've got isn't a security strategy. It's an authoritarian surveillance wish list come true. There is no more illusion of restraint or pretense of balance. Americans are being watched, tracked, analyzed, and categorized by a government that sees dissent as disloyalty and privacy as a loophole to be closed. The goal is not safety, it is submission. And under Trump's second term, your freedom has been rerouted through a facial recognition checkpoint, and the Fourth Amendment has been redacted into oblivion. Part 5. Due process is dead. In 2025, the Trump administration is proving that when it comes to the Bill of Rights, the Fifth Amendment is just another inconvenient speed bump on the road to authoritarian convenience. Due process, equal protection, and fair elections have been systematically reimagined as optional luxuries for the undeserving, rather than rights for the governed. At the heart of this constitutional demolition derby are mass deportations without hearings, ICE raids that look more like wartime roundups, and a voting strategy that would make Jim Crow blush. Let's start with immigration. In a stunt that would make John Adams spin in his powdered wig, Trump's DOJ exhumed the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to fast-track deportations without giving people so much as a chance to speak to a lawyer or breathe near a court. Originally designed for wartime France, this statute has now been rebranded as a 21st century sledgehammer for kicking out brown people without due process. Legal scholars and civil rights advocates immediately screamed bloody murder, because that's what this is. Bypassing hearings under the flimsiest national security pretext isn't just cruel, it's an executive tantrum in lawfare cosplay. These are not just hypotheticals. ICE, freshly emboldened by the second Trump coronation, launched a new wave of enforcement operations so sweeping it looks less like law enforcement and more like a medieval manhunt. Visa revocations, pre-dawn raids, and mass detentions have become a grotesque routine. Advocacy groups report immigrants, even legal ones, being yanked into custody without access to counsel, packed into expanded detention centers like cattle for deportation before the ink on their paperwork even dries. These aren't just bureaucratic snafus, they're systemic erasures of due process, where whole communities are ghosted by the state with the legal grace of a banana republic. The courts, already wheezing under the weight of executive contempt, are not having it, or at least not entirely. In April, U.S. District Judge Paula Zinnes threatened contempt proceedings over the administration's blatant refusal to return Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a deportee unlawfully removed despite court injunctions. Judge James Boasberg found probable cause for criminal contempt in similar deportation fiascos. The Supreme Court, in a rare flash of spine, even issued temporary blocks on certain removals, insisting that people must be given reasonable time to challenge their deportations, with reasonable time, of course, being a radical concept in a government that sees court orders as suggestions and courtrooms as nuisances. All of this would be bad enough if the attacks stopped at the border, but Trump's anti-democratic jihad extends right into the ballot box. In March, he signed Executive Order 14160, a fever dream of voter suppression so brazen it makes Bush v. Gore look like a friendly game of Monopoly. The order directs the Election Assistance Commission to require documentary proof of citizenship for voter registration and threatens to withhold federal election funds from states that don't comply. Passports or birth certificates, or you don't vote. End of discussion. The goal is clear. Purge the rolls of the poor, the young, the elderly, and the brown. It is not a policy. It is an eviction notice from democracy. Don't count on the Justice Department stepping in anytime soon. Under Trump's watch, DOJ officials have dropped voting rights cases like hot coals. They've abandoned challenges to Georgia's racist voting laws and walked away from Hazleton, Pennsylvania, where Hispanic voters were being structurally disenfranchised. The official rationale was that the suppression claims were unfounded since there was increased voter turnout. The real reason was a complete reprogramming of civil rights enforcements to ensure the government looks the other way as states suppress the vote under the guise of election security. The Supreme Court, not wanting to feel left out, joined the sabotage parade by reinstating Virginia's voter roll purge in October 2024, just weeks before the election. More than 1,600 people were removed based on dodgy data flagging them as non-citizens. Many of them were naturalized citizens or simply had DMV records that didn't match. No hearings, no fact-checking, they were just erased. When challenged, the court offered no full opinion, just a curt emergency order and a smirk. Welcome to judicial efficiency. Suppress first, explain never. Trump and his acolytes have gone on an endless tirade against mail-in voting, calling it fraudulent despite zero evidence and a whole universe of facts that say otherwise. Executive Order 14160 doesn't just invent a citizenship requirement, it instructs the DOJ to go after states that count ballots received after Election Day. Never mind that many military and overseas ballots rely on such timelines, or that counting all the votes used to be considered patriotic. In this administration, if you don't vote fast enough or in person, you're suspicious by default. And as if all this weren't Orwellian enough, the administration has begun using federal funding like a mafia protection racket. Comply with voter ID laws, adopt proof of citizenship, and maybe your state gets its election money. If you refuse, enjoy being publicly accused of harboring fraud. The White House has even floated using non-election funds like housing, education, and disaster relief as backdoor pressure points to force states into compliance. It's coercion in a suit and tie, with the veneer of policy but the soul of authoritarianism. So here we are, the Fifth Amendment gutted, the vote under siege, and the federal government more interested in purging democracy than protecting it. Trump's second term isn't just a sequel, it's a reboot of rights erosion as national policy. And unless the courts, the people, and Congress fight back hard and fast, we may not just be witnessing voter suppression. We might be watching the slow, deliberate strangling of constitutional democracy. Part 6. Democracy's Exit Exam. The first 90 days of Trump's second term have been a constitutional crime scene. Executive orders drop like drone strikes. Civil rights are stripped with the elegance of a smash-and-grab robbery. The administration has declared war on the First, Fourth, and Fifth Amendments, and the body count is already piling up. This is not just governance. It is the deliberate demolition of democracy by a man who believes the Constitution is something you wipe your shoes on before entering a golden elevator. We are now governed by executive fiat enforced by ICE raids and carried out by cabinet secretaries mercenaries with resumes lifted from Heritage Foundation fever dreams. The Alien Enemies Act, dug up from the crypt like a Lovecraftian horror show, is now used to expel immigrants with all the due process of a trapdoor. Peaceful protests are labeled terrorism. Voting is treated as a criminal enterprise. Surveillance is normalized. And when courts issue injunctions, the response from the Oval Office isn't compliance, it is contempt. Yes, there have been pushbacks. Judges in Denver and DC have stepped in, slapping temporary duct tape over the administration's unconstitutional gaping wounds. Civil liberties lawyers are working overtime, filing suits faster than the administration can invent new ways to trample the Bill of Rights. And Congress has even managed to muster a few press releases and the occasional strongly worded letter. But let's not kid ourselves. The pace and scale of executive defiance, open, repeated, and proud, represent a constitutional crisis in slow motion. And the longer it is tolerated, the faster that crisis metastasizes into the new normal. We have watched the Justice Department abandon Voting Rights Act enforcement like it was a bad Tinder date. We have watched the White House strong-arm the Election Assistance Commission into turning voter registration into a paperwork obstacle course. And we have seen court orders defied, press access revoked, academic freedom extinguished with budget freezes, and protesters tracked by spy satellites. Every warning we ignored in 2016 is now public policy. Every "that could never happen here" is happening now. But resistance is not extinct. Civil rights groups, legal watchdogs, independent journalists, and ordinary people are still in this fight. Lawsuits are moving through the courts. Investigative reporters are still exposing the rot, and congressional allies are still introducing bills, some symbolic, others substantial, none with a snowball's chance in hell of passing under this administration. Former national security officials are filing amicus briefs warning that the rule of law isn't just an abstraction. It is the only thing standing between a republic and a regime. The institutions are strained, but not yet broken. The people are tired, but not yet silenced. So what can you do in the face of this authoritarian fever dream? Stay informed. The media is under siege for a reason. Information is power. Read everything. Subscribe to outlets that haven't been sued into oblivion. Call your representatives, then call them again. Flood their inboxes, light up their switchboards. Let them know you see what's happening and that you will not forget. Give what you can to organizations on the front lines like the ACLU, NAACP, Democracy Forward, and others who are doing the legal trench warfare the rest of us can't. Vote like your rights depend on it, because they do. Organize, protest, run for office, knock on doors, talk to your neighbors, register people to vote, and challenge disinformation with truth even when it's hard, even when it's exhausting. Support independent journalists and whistleblowers. They are risking everything to tell you the truth before truth becomes contraband. And most of all, do not normalize this. Do not let exhaustion turn into acceptance, and do not let the slow bleed of civil liberties make you numb, because that is how authoritarianism wins. Not with a bang, but with 1,000 sighs of resignation. This is not just politics. This is history, and it is writing itself in real time. Your kids and grandkids will not ask how bad things were. They will ask what you did when it got this bad. So act like democracy is on fire, because it is. That's all for Brain Rot News. Like, comment, and subscribe before that's a violation of the Loyalty Oath Act of 2026. We'll see you in the streets or at the hearings, whichever comes first.